Good morning. If you would take your Bibles and open them up with me to Genesis chapter 26. And we have just experienced in chapter 25 the promised birth to Isaac and Rebekah. Remember their marriage and then 20 years of waiting. Finally, they receive God's blessing of children, not only just a child, but twins. But what do we find? Very quickly, we find right from the womb that the boys are at each other, and God had made a promise in chapter 25. Look at verse 23. The Lord said to Rebekah, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." We're going to see this to be problematic in today's text and actually in tomorrow's text. But right from the get-go, we see that the boys grow and they're very different. However, both of them have manifestations of the flesh and the sinful nature. Yet in verse 28 it says Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And maybe one of the most disturbing verses in this whole story. Hold on to that, because we see that this is going to become more problematic in the future. When we get to chapter 26, we're going to see some familiar themes, some of them good, some of them not good. So if you haven't already read chapter 26 of Genesis, stop right now and read it. And then we'll pray, and then we'll have some fellowship over the Word. Father, we thank you for today. It's Monday, and it's the day you've made, and we're going to rejoice in it. Father, today has circumstances that I cannot handle, but you can. My desire today is to be focused on you, that you would be at the forefront of my life today, so that as I live it, and as my brothers and sisters live it, that we're not just reacting to things that are happening in our lives, but we're acting in faith. Faith not in ourselves, but faith in you. Father, help us in this endeavor today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, verse 1 of chapter 26 begins with, "Now there was a famine in the land." Now, go back with me to chapter 12, when Abram at the time. In verse 10, look what it says. God has called him out of his homeland into the promised land, into Canaan. But it says in verse 10, "Now there was a famine in the land." Now we know exactly what Abram did. He went down to Egypt. And while in Egypt, he got into a lot of trouble because he was scheming and deceiving and lying. Now, there's some good news here. It says, "Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines." And then it says, "The Lord appeared to Isaac and said to him." This is important because this is the first time, really, outside of the children's birth, and God is speaking to Isaac. He says, "Do not go down to Egypt." Now remember, his dad was very adamant that he not leave the promised land. And so here again, God is stating, I don't want you to go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give these lands, and I will establish an oath which I swore to your father Abraham. So what's the stipulation that God is putting on Isaac? Stay in the land. If you stay in the land, I'm going to work through you. And we find that throughout Isaac's life, he obeyed this. Was he a perfect man? We're going to see far from it. Now, it says this: I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and will give your descendants all these lands. By your descendants, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Now, all of this is pointing to Messiah. Messiah is who is going to be the one that is going to be the blessing to the whole world. But Messiah is fully God, and he will need to be fully man, so he'll have to be born in some ethnic group, and God is forming that ethnic group. And it says, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now, don't get this mixed up with the law that comes later. The law that he had laid out for Abraham was, leave your family, leave your country, go to a land that I'm going to tell you. That's the extent of it. So when you start bringing the law that came hundreds of years later with Moses, we're not even to that covenant yet. So I think it's a good way of ordering our understanding of how God is revealing his overall plan as we think through the covenants. Again, the covenants are first the covenant between the Father and the Son, the eternal covenant. He invited Adam into this covenant. At that point, the extent of the covenant was, look, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you don't eat from it, we'll have fellowship. Adam broke that. But God came and promised restoration through the seed of the woman. We move forward from that into the time of Noah. The world had gotten so wicked within 10 generations that there were only 8 people on the earth that knew God in any extent. And so God destroys the whole earth with a flood, except for 8 people and the animals that were on the ark. And the covenant made with Noah was really not the covenant only made to Noah. It was the covenant to all of creation that God would never again flood the earth, flood the whole earth and destroy it that way. The next covenant comes in chapter 12 to Abram, later who becomes Abraham. And the extent of that covenant was what we just said. Leave your relatives, leave your country, and go into a land that I'm going to tell you. He affirms that to Isaac here. I'm going to be with you because of your father Abraham. Don't leave the land. So keep that in mind. It says, so Isaac lived in Gerar. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, what? Does this sound familiar? She is my sister. Now, we know back in chapter 12, verse, let's go back there. It's chapter 12, verses 10 through the end of the chapter. We see that his father, Abraham, or Abram at the time, and Sarah made a deal. And there was a partial truth in that, because remember, Sarah had the same, and Isaac had the same father, yet different mothers. And so they lied. But what do we find Isaac doing? We find Isaac saying the same lie. But there was no truth in it at all. And if you'll remember in Exodus 20, we haven't gotten there yet in our studies, but in Exodus 20, Moses is receiving the 10 Commandments. And the second commandment is to not have any idols, no graven images. And at the end, it talks about this. And let's read it together. Exodus 20. I don't want to misquote it. It says this in verse 15. I mean, not verse 15, in verse 5. It says, verse 4 says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol of any, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity is another word for rebellion, visiting the rebellion of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me." Why do I bring that verse in? If I have children and I don't deal with my own sin, and even if I deal with it, it's going to come up. There's going to be patterns of generational sin. We see that here. Isaac committing the same lie that his father committed. For he was afraid to say, "My wife," thinking that the men of the place might kill him on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. Now, we know this back in chapter 20, that Abraham does the same thing to the same group of people. It talks about Abimelech there and Abimelech here. Remember, Abimelech is just another name for the king, so it's probably not the same person, but a generation later. And it says this, it came about, verse 8, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out through a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing his wife, Rebekah. So, remember, we've been trying to focus on the character of God through all of this. And I want you to again affirm the fact that even God's people, they're blowing it. Yet God's plan is not going to be stopped. What we read in Job, God's plan cannot be thwarted. And so even though we have Isaac lying about Rebekah, God is protecting him. Now, it's a painful protection here because Isaac and Rebekah are supposed to be an example of faith in Yahweh to the Philistine people. But yet we see them acting treacherously toward them. It says Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say she's my sister?" And Isaac said to him, "Because I said I might die on account of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the peoples might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." It's amazing that even the Philistines have a fear of God. Way more of a fear of God than people have in our day and age. So Abimelech charged all the people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." What we can say is that because of Isaac's sin, he left a bad taste in the mouth of the people around him. And that's going to add resentment as we read on. It says, "Now Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold." Now, I want you to picture what's going on. So here Isaac lived, and all the Philistines lived. They lived in the same location. They got this they planted in the same soil, they got the same amount of precipitation, the same amount of sun. Yet, Isaac's crops are producing way, way more than all of the Philistine crops. Now, if Isaac hadn't lied to them and lost his credibility, he could have really pointed them to the Lord and really invited them to be part of the Lord, but we don't see that happening. What do we see happening? It says, the Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. For he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. You can understand that Isaac's life didn't point them to Yahweh. And their thought is, hey, this guy's a liar. We were the ones that did right, at least in this situation, and somehow he keeps getting richer. And maybe they knew that it was the Lord, but not really understanding why. And Isaac really had lost the ability to be able to explain to them why. Now look at verse 15. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines stopped up by filling them with the dirt. If you go back to chapter 21, there was a covenant made between Abimelech and Abraham. And it was over the fact that Abraham had dug a well and that the Philistines had taken possession of it. And they made a covenant that the wells would be respected. Water is always very important, but when you're living in the wilderness, in the desert, water is of the utmost importance. And so Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are too powerful for us." And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. There's seems to be a very different personality set between Abraham and his son Isaac. And I think that even what we're going to see with Isaac's children, Jacob and Esau, I think we see a difference. Abraham was much more of a forthright, confrontational person. It seems as if Isaac is much more withdrawn, much more non-confrontational. And what we're going to see in Isaac's children is that Esau is very much confrontational and Jacob is very much more non-confrontational. And so that will play out in different ways. But you can't even hardly imagine Abraham just giving up and going away. Go away from us, for you are too powerful. And he did. Seems as if Isaac just doesn't want any trouble. But the trouble's going to follow him. And then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. For the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. Now that's another wrinkle in this. When we go back to chapter 21, the Philistines had made an agreement, a covenant with Abraham, but they didn't make it with Isaac. And so as soon as Abraham died, they made the wells, which they felt like made Abraham so wealthy, they stopped them up so that Isaac couldn't use them. But did it stop Isaac from getting even more wealthy? No, it did not. Why? Because the Lord had blessed Isaac because of the covenant. It wasn't because of the wells. But again, the Philistines have no way of knowing this because of Isaac's deception. He wasn't able to share the truth with them. He had already been discredited. Look what it says, verse 19. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of flowing water, so a spring, they found an underwater spring, which was very valuable. The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with the herdsmen of Isaac, saying, the water is ours, which is ridiculous because Isaac's servants are the ones that dug it. But again, we see Isaac backing off. He named the well Esek, which means contention. There's a fight over this well, so Isaac just backs out. Goes on, it says, because they contended with him. You can well imagine that Abraham would have contended right back with them. But Isaac, more passive. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Look what it says. It says, then they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too, and he named it Sitnah, which means hatred. They hate me. Okay? But yet he doesn't do anything about it. He backs off. But we know that it's a miraculous thing that he's finding water. Everywhere he digs, it appears that Isaac finds water. And he moved away from there and dug another well. And they did not quarrel over it, so he named it Rehoboth, which means enlargement. It's big enough now all of us can live in peace. For he said, at last the Lord has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land. So we do see Isaac having a relationship with the Lord. We see that he had one when he was waiting for his wife. We find that he had a relationship with the Lord when his wife could not have children. And we find him here again having a relationship with the Lord. God talked to him and told him not to go down to Egypt, and he didn't. So what do we see? We see a man in this chapter who, at least in some regard, loves the Lord and has a relationship with the Lord. We also see a man who loves his wife and has a great relationship with his wife. That's all seemingly going to change as we get into the next chapter. It says then, verse 23 says, then he went up from there to Beersheba. Now Beersheba was the place where the well that Abraham had made a covenant with the Philistines. It says he went up there to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. Why would God state that? Well, it seems as if from all the well fiasco that Isaac was afraid. But God comes and affirms to him the covenant. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. You don't have to go and scheme. You don't have to go and lie, cheat, and steal. I'm with you. This is a big promise here. One that he should remember in the next chapter, however he does not. So he built an altar and called upon the name of the Lord. And pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. Everywhere he goes, he's digging these wells. And it's almost as if every well he digs is a spring that he supernaturally finds. The Lord is guiding him. He has a walk with the Lord. Then it says, Abimelech came to him from Gerar, and his advisors Ahuzath and Phicol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" Remember, the two wells were called Esek and Sitnah, contention and hatred. I left because we couldn't get along because you hated me. Now you're coming down here to have a talk with me. What's going on? And they said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." How could they see that plainly? Through the wells. Everywhere Isaac went, he finds water. And remember, in through all times, water means wealth. You can't water your crops, you can't water your livestock if you don't have a well. And everywhere Isaac goes, it seems as if God blesses him with this, with finding water. And it says, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, even between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you." Now, a while ago, they're upset with him and tell him to go away. But maybe they start to think, hey, maybe when Isaac left, the blessing left with him. Maybe up there they're thinking, hey, we can find water just as well as Isaac. But then guess what? They find out that they cannot. So they back up and say, hey, let's backtrack. Let's make sure that we get an agreement with Isaac so that the Lord will bless us too. Then it says, and side note, people who bless the nation of Israel get blessed. We see that pattern all the way through the Old Testament. Verse 29, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. Now, you are now the blessed of the Lord. So they understand that the Lord is blessing him. They kind of sugarcoat the fact that they were stealing his wells. They just kind of sugarcoated that. Oh, let there be nothing between you and me. But remember, because of Isaac's deception over his wife, it really had skewed his ability to speak truth to these people. How painful it is when the lost world has to point out the sin of the saved individual, the believer, put it that way. And the fact that these Philistines had more faith seemingly in God in this regard than the covenant child. Verse 30, then he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they arose early, and they exchanged oaths. Then Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. Now, it came about on the same day that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they had dug, and they said, we have found water. So they called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is called Beersheba. Now, this connects us back to the Beersheba where Abraham dug a well, and they had an agreement. And as soon as Abraham died, they filled the well in with water because they didn't want to see Isaac getting wealthy. But now, guess what? Isaac is wealthier. And they go and they dig another well right there in that same place. And they call it Sheba, which the city is called Beersheba to this day. Remember, Beersheba means the well of the oath. So, again, affirming kind of the same oath that Abraham had made with Abimelech here, it's made again. Verse 34 changes subjects. It says Esau was 40 years old. So at this point, if Esau is 40 years old, guess how old Jacob is? Both of them 40 years old. And we find that if you think back in chapter 25 at the end, we see Esau caring more about physical things, and we see Jacob caring more about spiritual things. So much so that Esau is willing to sell his birthright to his brother for a bowl of stew. Now, whether he thought that that meant anything, it appears that if Esau really doesn't care about spiritual things, he's going to care about the birthright only when it comes with a blessing which would bring material wealth. But here again, at the end of chapter 26, we're going to see that Esau has no desire for a relationship with God. Because what does he do? He goes and marries two women, revealing that God never blesses that. It always brings trouble. But not only is he marrying two women, but both of them are Canaanite women. Remember Abraham's adamant command: don't get a wife for Isaac from among the Canaanites. They're immoral, they're idolaters. And then we're going to see later that Rebekah doesn't want Jacob to marry one of the Canaanite women. So this really disqualifies Esau from any way being the promised seed. But we already know God said it's not going to be the oldest, it's going to be the youngest. But here, there's no way that the Messiah can come through this. It says Esau was 40 years old and he married Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And what? They brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. We're going to see that the grief that is caused to Isaac and Rebekah really have a lot more to do with their own undealt with sin. And that this marriage that we see come together in chapter 25, even the nature by which he's caressing his wife in chapter 26. Between chapter 26 and chapter 27, something happens drastic, where we see many years pass, and we see a marriage that started out like this. We see a family that starts out like this, and we see it going in opposite directions. I think there's lots to learn through the life of Isaac. Yes, the covenant came through Isaac, but his life largely is a disaster from what we learn in Scripture. Did he have a relationship with God? Yes, but he didn't end well. We're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to connect on that same theme. It's a kind of an awkward place to end, but we're going to end right here and pick up on it tomorrow. Father God, we love you. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the lives of sinful people that you have used, that we can see your sovereign plan being carried out, even sometimes despite the decisions of your servant. Father, I pray that today we can be light for you in the world, and that we would not trust in deception. Father, use us today for your glory. In Jesus' name we pray.